Hi there. I'm Dean Bubley, and welcome to the showcase number two on spectrum options and trade-offs for private 5G and enterprise wireless. And I've got a set of really good panelists. We've got a 45-minute session, and it's going to follow on a little bit from the last panel, which I suspect that people may have watched, unless you're watching this on catch-up recorded afterwards. And we're going to look at what's going on with enterprise wireless and the demands on what are sometimes called spectrum for verticals, although realistically that's the 97% of the economy which isn't the telecoms industry. And in particular, what that means around private 4G and 5G networks, also Wi-Fi and maybe some other technologies as well. So I'm an industry analyst and advisor. I've actually been following private cellular networks for 20 years. First time I saw a small cell for business use was in 2001. And these days I spend a lot of time talking about private cellular, Wi-Fi, neutral host, indoor and private networks for enterprise and industry, as well as the implications for spectrum policy. And I've been watching the evolution of private allocations of spectrum for quite some time. And really what's happening at the moment seems to have hit an inflection point where we've got in Europe, in North America, in bits of Asia, localized spectrum available for industrial use, transport hubs, offices, business parks, entertainment venues, and so on, often integrated into IT and operational technology systems. And it sort of bridges the gap between what mobile operators and service providers can offer and what enterprises are used to with their operational technology in industry or IT portfolios for office type environments. And so the panel I've got today is going to really delve into some of the trade-offs here. And what I'd like to do is first off to introduce Heidi Himmonen from Traficom, the Finnish regulator, who's going to give us a short presentation. Hopefully, Heidi, your storm outside hasn't disrupted your connection. So over to you.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you. We have a thunderstorm ongoing here, so it's quite exciting. Also, maybe affecting some of our communication connections. So my name is Heidi Himmonen. I work as a chief advisor at the Finnish Transport and Communications Agency, Traficom. I'm going to give you a very short overview of the mobile spectrum and a little bit on Wi-Fi in the 5 and 6 gigahertz bands, but obviously we also support fiber and satellite connections, and these will also be very necessary for private enterprise use. Next slide, please. So here you see an overview of the current mobile spectrum, or spectrum for mobile broadband in Finland, and we have assigned a lot of spectrum. We want to make the spectrum available quickly, and we don't have any large fiscal goals. We want to be cheap to build and easier to plan, less congestion, more capacity. We have cheap prices and unlimited data and very good coverage. As you can see, we have more than 99% of the population with 2G, 3G, and 4G, and very large coverage already when you look at the population coverage with 5G. We have assigned dedicated spectrum for local networks in the 2.3 gigahertz band and in the 25 gigahertz band. There are also many private networks already built in the operators bands, and in the 3.5 gigahertz band, well, each operator has 130 megahertz of spectrum, and there is an obligation to lease the spectrum if you don't use it or can provide services in a specific area. So then there's an obligation to lease this spectrum for private networks, for example. Also, I listed some future spectrum that we see as very potential in Finland, especially 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz band is very interesting in having a potentially quite harmonized band in Europe. What we mean with local, we have actually new regulation for these local networks in 2.3 and 25 gigahertz band. Actually, these local bands can be used for local private use, so for example, campuses, but also small-scale public networks for example, in shopping centers, sports arenas, passenger harbors, and so on. And actually, we have quite light little bureaucracy here, so you don't need to apply for a network license from the government as the mobile operators do to provide public services. And also these bands can be used for fixed wireless access. Next, please. So just to highlight that we have very heterogeneous needs in different 5G verticals, or in any verticals, not only talking about 5G. And of course, there are expectations for 5G to meet all these very different kinds of needs, not only when it comes to quality of service, but also I want to highlight the coverage. So we have actually we have provided spectrum for local coverage and for local networks. But if these verticals need wider areas or national coverage, then they have to turn to operators who better can provide this. And we don't actually promote any dedicated bands for dedicated verticals or dedicated networks for different verticals, but we actually also, for example, in transport, we want to promote use of commercial networks and really emphasize that we should look into how these commercial networks, mobile networks, can meet the requirements. Next, please. So just a few words about the wireless LAN in 5 GHz band and 6 GHz band. Very interesting. And actually, we are now putting limitations to this 5 GHz band compared to what has been currently the regulation. So we are actually in Finland now implementing the restrictions for UAV use to protect weather radars. But there are also some limitations for use in trains proposed in parts of this 5 GHz band. And Finland really proposes national flexibility of implementation of these limitations, because we could have quite small or no interference risks seen in. So we really would like to have some national flexibility in this European decision, so we don't need to implement limitations that are unnecessary for us. And the 6 GHz band, as you might know, there is a decision, ECC decision. Actually, there is now also a EC decision. We are implementing this, and we had a concern to protect radio links, and now this is then lies on spectrum supervision, and that we promote the upper 6 GHz band to be investigated for IMT in the next World Radio Conference. So thank you. This concludes my presentation. I'm very happy to answer your questions later.
Thank you very much, Heidi. Thanks. One quick question, just because I know that some people will probably ask, is do you have any indications for how many of the local networks there are? And I'm guessing the ones in 2.3 gigahertz, they're probably 4G, not 5G. Is that reasonable?
Yes, that's correct. We actually have published a list in our webpage. We have a webpage for local 4G and 5G networks. You can just put it in the Google and Traficom local 4G, 5G, you find it. And there is a list of all the licenses. And as we just opened this 25 gigahertz band, we have one frequency reservation now. But in the 2.3 gigahertz band, I guess there was something less than 20 networks.
Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed, Heidi. Right, I'll welcome you back later on for the panel part of this. But what I'd quite like to do now is to introduce our second speaker, is Mitch de Geest, who's the CEO of CityMesh from Belgium. Mitch, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I want to talk a little bit about CityMesh and what we've been doing here in Belgium. CityMesh is an operator in Belgium. We own nationwide 4G, so 2.6 gigahertz spectrum, 2 times 15 megahertz, and we also own a nationwide 5G or 3.5 gigahertz nationwide spectrum, being 40 megahertz. So TDD on the 3.5, FDD on the 2.6 nationwide, but we have no nationwide network. So it's not our goal, or it's not our vision or aim to build a nationwide network using 2.6 or 3.5. We exclusively focus on the industrial side of 4G and 5G. So we build mobile private networks. One of our reference cases is Brussels Airport. So the international airport in Brussels, we have deployed a mobile private network. We also have deployed a mobile private network in some of the major ports here in Belgium. We also have a network deployed in all major offshore wind farms in Belgium, and also some in the Netherlands and some in the UK. So we've been quite involved in the whole licensing and getting spectrum to work out our vision, or to address the market of mobile private networks. And we see a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities regarding spectrum. We used to have only 3.5 gigahertz spectrum, and I'm sure we're going to discuss that a little bit later on during the questions. But then at a certain point in time, we decided to also buy 2.6 gigahertz about 1 year ago, because of the ecosystems of 5G, 4G, the needs of the different verticals. As I explained, we started off with ports and airports and offshore energy, offshore wind farms. But now we're discussing with hospitals, campus sites, public safety, public transportation, even city centers. We're deploying, as we speak, our first city center network for the city. So there's a lot of on one hand, a lot of technical possibilities. For example, we also have a deal with one of the national operators here in Belgium. So we are kind of an MVNO on their network as well, and we combine the private bubbles with the nationwide coverage using the same SIM card. So a lot of new technical ways to approach the market, but also a whole different kind of ecosystem that needs to become available to really grow the market and build a lot of large mobile private networks. We're involved in different studies on 5G broadcasting, different projects in hospitals, also regarding 5G corridors, and so on and so on. So I'm happy to answer your questions during this session. Thank you.
Mitch, thanks for that. That's really interesting. I mean, so would you classify Citymesh as a sort of a specialized mobile operator, or a part MNO, or a next gen? Well, when you describe Citymesh, how do you normally sort of phrase it?
Well, today we are we exclusively focus on those mobile private networks. So we create mobile private network bubbles. So we're in case an operator, but we do not have a nationwide network, so we cannot claim we're an operator. So we also, I forgot to mention that the auction for the 700 megahertz in Belgium will probably happen somewhere in 2022. We have set our goals to also acquire some 700 megahertz spectrum and roll out a nationwide network, but again, only for those business critical, mission critical use cases, so no consumer network. So our position is we are an industrial MNO and a consumer MVNO.
Got it. And that makes a lot of sense. It's a really interesting definition as well. But Mitch, thank you. I'll welcome you back in a few more minutes for the panel session. But what I'd like to do now is just to welcome up to the stage our third speaker. And in fact, if you were on the previous panel session, you will have seen Sander Rotmanson already. He's from Siemens and looks after wireless for industrial automation. Siemens, over to you. Sorry, Sander, over to you.
So yeah, I'll represent all of Siemens, no problem today. So Dean, thanks for having me. So my name is Sander Rotmans, and within Siemens Digital Industries, I'm responsible for the industrial wireless communication portfolio, meaning 2G, 3G, 4G routers, 5G, router since a couple of weeks, and we are working on private network solutions as well, combined with our industrial wireless LAN. So really great to see countries such as Finland opening up spectrum, which we can use in industrial innovative networks in the future. So back to you, Dean, and
quick one on that last comment is you're in an interesting position because you do both the industrial 5G and industrial sort of wireless LAN / Wi-Fi. How do you blend those two together in the typical customer environment, or is it some customers want one, some want the other, or do they coexist?
Yes, and yes. So today it's a lot of industrial wireless LAN because it's a technology which is there, which is established, people use it. It has over 15 years of activity on the market. So if a customer now needs to add something to an existing plant, it's always easier to add a little bit of wireless LAN because all is existing end device already wireless LAN capable. Then looking for a 5G that is really something interesting for the coming years. So I think in 3 to 5 years this will take off. From my perspective, in a bigger way. And then where we need to look at is what do you do with what? Because as you just heard in the previous session, we don't have unlimited spectrum available. So with 5G, I really need to manage how I use that spectrum. And for example, what I could see going on is mission critical applications running in private spectrum solutions, whereas less mission critical applications, for example, information for workers in the factory on a smartphone or on a tablet going through a Wi-Fi network. Maybe not all end devices are already available with 5G connectivity. And if they have an older version of Wi-Fi connectivity, they are immediately compatible with Wi-Fi, which is hitting the shelves now. So those will really coexist from our point of view in the future, and that's what makes it interesting. And yes, we are aware that we're the sole supplier of both technologies from one vendor at the moment. Yes.
Great. All right, thank you. Sander, stay around. I think we're now going to welcome back up to the stage, and hopefully magic will happen, and we'll have all three of the panelists up and excellent, and everyone's still online. That's worked very seamlessly. So just a question, and whoever particularly wants to take it. In Europe, it seems to be that most of the enterprise-focused spectrum is being used for sort of industrial or transport hubs, or maybe energy and utilities. Is that something we see going forward, or are we going to see more of a democratization of private wireless and private 4G and 5G to other sectors of the economy as well? Don't know. Mitch, you mentioned cities, for example.
Yeah. I'll be happy to take this one. We see a lot of traction in a lot of different verticals. Like I mentioned earlier on, the early adapters were more the ports and airports, large logistic hubs. But now we see basically every industry that is coping with the limitations of what is possible with Wi-Fi is now looking to roll out a mobile private network. We've been deploying Wi-Fi networks for more than 10 years, also in the enterprise markets. But we see that a lot of those companies, they are now running to the limitation of what is possible with Wi-Fi based on the business critical, mission critical. So a lot of hospitals, a lot of large campus sites, even manufacturing lines where they do have scan systems and so on. And they see that the uptime of Wi-Fi is not sufficient to run their current business. But they also understand that if they want to continue innovation and start working with remote control systems and so on, they need to have a more reliable wireless connectivity solution. And then they automatically are turned to cellular, 4G, 5G, but most of them, they do not want to run their business on a public network, security, cybersecurity, but also everything with the data flow. They don't want to be dependent on an infrastructure of a third party. So we see a lot of different markets becoming available.
That's interesting, because it's almost like there's two trade-offs. There's private cellular versus Wi-Fi or Tetra or other technologies, and there's private cellular versus public cellular. I mean, Heidi, are you seeing that in Finland as well?
Yes, definitely. Yes. Yeah. We have seen many different solutions actually, and also a demand for these private networks. Even before we made the local spectrum available, we have like small an operator building these local networks, little similar like to CityMesh. So who is leasing spectrum from the mobile network operators bands, and they started in harbors and ports and industrial areas, and now also we see the similar development in these local bands. So they are industrial campuses, power plants, harbors, but now there start to be interest, for example, from agriculture and different verticals also. But still, this local spectrum is best available for this kind of local campuses, so industrial campuses and maybe university campuses also. They are quite interested. But maybe one highlight, we have very good research projects ongoing in the smart city sector also, and they would be quite interested to build a kind of this neutral host network that could have a larger coverage, citywide coverage. And I think the regulation for even for the small scale public networks does not cover our largest cities. So it's kind of to balancing the regulation and then the needs, and let's see. I think this smart city is quite an interesting sector to see how we can meet the demands and how they can find business and operational models to cooperate with the MNOs on this.
And thank you. And how's that changed over time in terms of inbound requests to Traficom for local spectrum versus maybe you going, well, speaking publicly on events like this and almost putting it in front of people? I mean, how much is pull and how much is push?
We had a strong debate, of course, already when assigning the 3.5 gigahertz band, if we should set aside spectrum for local and private networks, and then the decision was political, obvious. But it seemed to be that the voices raised for this was more from the research organizations, and we didn't see like real. I mean, the users, those who would use the spectrum, did not yet. Then they were not active in 2018 when we auctioned this spectrum. So there was not kind of a real demand seen then. I think it's very good that we have been able now to meet this slowly raising demand by giving some local spectrum also in the mid band, not only in the high band. And I hope that this will continue then, because we will see more and more demand for this local spectrum, and maybe the 3.8 to 4.2 is very potential in this sense.
Yeah, I'll come on to that in a second. Sander, from your perspective, on the private cellular, is this something that, if you like, Siemens is going out and selling as a concept, or do you have people coming to you saying, "Can you do this? We've heard about it."
So it's a little bit of both. So for sure, we have committed ourselves to create a technical solution. So we have already rolled out some proof of concepts based on our prototypes. So one of them is actually pretty well known in the news lately. So in Germany, we have the largest European 5G private testbed, or public testbed, if you want to call it. It's called the 5G Smart Venue from the Deutsche Messe AG, where we will invite every single company from small to very large to try out 5G within a couple months from now. Actually, we're installing today. And that is something where we really want to drive this need for topics. And actually, Heidi, that's exactly what we've seen as well. So in 2018-19, we got to be active in Germany. Like, we need this, which has also started from our research and research groups, of course. And now we see customers being active and saying, "Hey, thank you, this is a great decision. Now we can actually do something." And unfortunately, we woke up too late to voice that together, I would say. And now we need to find a way how we can leverage and get the most out of it, and creating sustainable, low-cost solutions to get spectrums in the hands of everyone in the industry space, but also in the agriculture space.
That's really interesting. What's your thoughts, Sander, on this idea of the possible 3.8 to 4.2 band, which I know the UK already has, Finland was discussing it, I think Norway made talked about it recently, and a couple of other countries around the world, I think Saudi Arabia and a few others. Do you see that as a possible sort of semi-harmonized option for the future?
Yeah, so I could definitely live with that. So it's an N77 band, which is also supported already by today's technology. That means we don't have to wait for technology to become available to use it. No, we are actually already shipping products now which are supporting band N77. So that will be something we could directly access and use from an industry perspective. And therefore, I think this is a very good spectrum area to look at. Especially, it seems to be it talked about in more and more countries, and creating a pathway to find a non-scattered private 5G or private spectrum layout for at least all of Europe. I think it's a way out there. And then we've also heard that other countries, such as even China, is looking into diving into private spectrum based on the successes we see here in Germany and with the CBRS band, for example, as well in the US. So.
Yeah, I think there's a session on CBRS later. Yeah, Mitch. Actually, there's a couple of questions in the chat that are targeted at you as well. I don't know if you've seen them. One was about the national spectrum band, which I think you said was 700. The other one is really interesting, which is what's the business model for private networks? I mean, as you're a service provider. Are you providing a managed service? Are you doing integration and implementation? How does that look like? And also, if you have thoughts on the band 77 as well.
Well, yeah, indeed, a couple of questions. Maybe first about the band 28, so 700 megahertz. That's being auctioned in Belgium, and something we see or still see now is that although we have mid-band spectrum, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that later on, we see that a lot of use cases where we will need low-band spectrum as well. So that's why we're looking at band 28. Regarding the business model, typically, if we really build a mobile private network, because we often are somewhere in between, we have different business models. But if we build a mobile private network, we build that as a service. So, for example, in Brussels Airport, we built that mobile private network as a service. So we come in, we do the calculations, we put down the macro, mini macro, small cells, whatever is needed in different bands, if that's needed, depending on the use case. We come in together with our spectrum, of course, that we have nationwide, and we manage that network as a service for the airport. So we are responsible. We have SLAs and so on and so on. And it's not a consumption model. It's a model based on the square meters that are being covered, being calculated on the amount of base stations we need. So that's also a game changer. If you look to normal cellular, where it's consumption driven, but for a city and also an airport, there are now more than 100 use cases defined on top of that network, which all consume data. It would not be realistic for the airport to do that on a consumption driven model. On the other hand, we also invest in rolling out our own networks, for example, in the offshore wind farms. And there we are a typical operator, and we use consumption-driven models.
I think that's really interesting. The sort of business model flexibility aligns with the sort of technology diversity that we heard about, and the frequency diversity. So, I mean, what this aligns with is what I hear from enterprises is which, some of them, they've got different ways they want to either own, consume as a service, work with an integrator, or whatever. And then there's also use cases which might require low band, mid band, millimeter wave, and it's how do you add all of those together from both a delivery point of view and also a regulatory one. I mean, Heidi, are you seeing something similar to that?
So you mean that there is need for all this low band, mid band, and high band?
And also the service model, ownership model, different per area rather than per gigabyte or something like that.
Well, yes. Well, we provide the spectrum licenses for the specific areas, so we don't look into in the details how it is used, but definitely we think, well, I personally think there is a need for both mid-band and high-band, and now the discussion seems to be around the mid-band. Maybe not so much on the low band in Finland yet, but it seems that, like for example, companies working with the smart grid or other things like this who could need some kind of private type of network would then use network slicing from the mobile operators and turn to them for the very good coverage they have, actually.
I'm a bit of a slicing skeptic, I'll admit, but okay. So, Sander, a question to you. I mean, I know we've discussed before about the mid-band, and I think also millimeter wave now in Germany. But you mentioned agriculture, which presumably uses really wide areas. So, is that suitable for those, or does that need, something lower?
So the lower the spectrum, the better it is from a ROI perspective if you roll out a private network, for sure. However, I think C-band, so 3.7 to 3.8 or 3.8 to 4.2, I think it's substantially enough to cover an agricultural area. So I don't need a countrywide low band solution. That's not what we aim for in our type of work. However, millimeter wave is not key. Millimeter wave just gets too expensive because we need certain coverage areas, and where we also talk about is adding more is just communication. So we talk about finding additional services on different kind of solutions. So I think where we're spoken about a lot is also localization. So we typically do it nowadays with ultra wideband, which is a great solution to track narrow, to get really narrow and accurate locating positions. However, this doesn't work outdoor, so this is difficult in agriculture use cases. There, 5G could be really helpful. And there may be millimeter wave at some areas might be really interesting because I have that big chunk of spectrum there, which enables me to locate a little bit more precisely. Or indoor, you could combine it with ultra wideband, for example. Then C-band, from my perspective, is enough. So there's use cases for both. However, I think C-band is for local private networks the way to go within the next years.
Thank you. Thanks. Just to people who are watching, if you want to add in additional questions, we've had a couple that have come through. I'm watching the chat function here, but we've got plenty to be going on with for Q&A with amongst ourselves. Heidi, I know you mentioned 6 gigahertz briefly. Sander, obviously, and Mitch, you've also talked about Wi-Fi as well. In fact, I know there's a 6 gigahertz session going along in parallel to this, but let's just touch on that for now. We've just had the lower 500 megahertz or 480 provided for unlicensed use, primarily for Wi-Fi 6E. I know, Mitch, you mentioned that there's obviously limitations on Wi-Fi because of interference or heavy usage. How much of a game changer is 6 gigahertz, either the bottom half of the band or all of it? Is the 6E fix some of those problems, or Wi-Fi 7 as well in future?
Well, what we see is that, and I'll give the example of the offshore wind farms. What we have installed there is some macro cells using 40 megahertz in 3.5, but we also have over 50 mesh Wi-Fi base stations in those wind farms, and we actually, on the CPE side that's installed on the vessels, we combine the 4G, 5G with the mesh system. So what we see as an evolution is that we are able, using our limited amount of spectrum in cellular spectrum, as an kind of an anchor, a security line, where we are sure we can have good connectivity towards that vessel. But if it's in the range of a Wi-Fi signal, we put that Wi-Fi signal kind of on top of it. So we typically provide a vessel between 50 and 80 megabits using only the cellular network. But when it's in the wind farm, it goes up to 250, 300 megabits a second using the Wi-Fi link as an extra add-on bandwidth module. So that's how I see it evolving in the industry, where the local networks will always have a limited amount of, especially in the mid bands, a limited amount of spectrum available. But using those higher bands and those Wi-Fi bands, we can use that to put more bandwidth in the network.
Great, thank you. Okay, Heidi, go ahead.
Yes. Just to add that, I think we need the flexibility of them all. So we need the Wi-Fi and the mobile networks. But what I think is quite interesting to see now, what is the role and the difference between the 26 gigahertz 5G licensed and then the Wi-Fi in the 5 to 6 gigahertz bands, and what will be the role of this? That's interesting to see.
Yeah, and I agree. And actually, I mean, Sondre, presumably you do both of those, and presumably you're evaluating 6E and you're watching 7. Is this all about the technology, or is it also about things like skills? I imagine that most of your customers have got people on their IT team who understand Wi-Fi, but they probably don't understand millimeter wave 5G and standalone cores and stuff.
And so definitely it's a skill set. So we need to create a so from my point of view, there's a couple interesting things about Wi-Fi, especially with 6E coming up. We have a clean space, so no legacy devices holding the abilities of Wi-Fi back. So the moment a legacy device, Ether 2.11n, for example, connects into a Wi-Fi 6 device, the whole cell, the whole radio is scaled down in performance. So with 6E, you don't have that. So yeah, you have a real new drawing board to find out an innovative solution, really get the best out of the standard. So that's one of the big opportunities. We are more as doubling the amount of spectrum, so it's easier to have systems being installed beside each other in an ISM band. So that really helps with channel planning and the interference topic. And then when we talk about management, I think there's one thing is key. We've done this already in the early 2000s, creating a Wi-Fi solution, which was developed for OT engineers. So we didn't create another Wi-Fi solution for telecom people. So as I always said, my dad used to be able to set up our Wi-Fi, but not the Wi-Fi he got from his mobile, from our network operator at home. So that was already a good feeling if we are able to do something simple. And that I think is also going to be key for providers of equipment and solutions, creating a 5G mobile network solution, which is able to be managed in a certain way by blue collar workers. So we do not need to be fully dependent on a service provider to come in to add a new device to the network. This needs to be easy because Christmas Eve, 8 o'clock, and an AGV standstill. Who's gonna fix it if it's a cellular network issue? We could call Mitch, of course, and he probably comes over, but not every MNO will be doing that for a reasonable fee. And therefore, this is something which needs to be hands-on and easy, and that's what we want to work on and leverage to creating a sustainable solution on all perspectives.
Okay, good. Moving on a little bit. At the moment, both in Germany and I think in Finland and certainly UK, we've got sort of administrative solutions, almost like a manual solution to sort of local spectrum allocations. Do you see the need to move to more of a sort of CBRS type dynamic or database or automated platform for some of this, or are we've only got 10, 20, 100 applications, doesn't really need it yet? What's your view? Any of you really? Heidi, maybe start.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I've been involved in the discussions on the dynamic spectrum use and sharing and this and what we see is that the private local networks, they want to be sure that they can use the spectrum, so they can't do it with the secondary use. And we had this discussion when releasing this 2.3 gigahertz band for local, because it was used for cordless cameras and for TV production, and they were primary users. But we kind of realized that it would not work, that you have to close your local 4G network if there is a TV production coming close. So, for example, the first license we granted was to a nuclear power plant, and they don't want to close their 4G networks. Well, there will not be TV productions there, but anyway. So what we did was we actually kind of moved the users of the cordless cameras. It was possible to a little bit to squeeze them in the upper part of the 2.3 to 2.4 gigahertz band, and then have this 20 megahertz band for the LTE networks instead of doing some kind of license shared access methods. So we are kind of skeptical that it hasn't been necessary yet, and maybe I don't know about the 3.8 to 4.2 how we can do the sharing if some kind of registration would be needed. What we tried to do in Finland in the 66 to 71 gigahertz band, we were suggesting in the European spectrum work that this band could be somehow used not only for like totally license exempt basis, but some kind of registration to give a little bit better protection to the local 5G networks in that band. But that was not supported, so we didn't. That was not a success, but that was our idea, to give a little bit better protection actually in this kind of license exempt SRD bands. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we're about to run out of time, so sort of Mitch or Sandra, I don't know if you've got any last thoughts either on that or any other topic. We've got about 30 seconds each.
Well, just to wrap it up, I agree with Heidi. We do not see we see some questions about dynamic spectrum sharing, but we rather see more multi-operator core networks now being used, where neutral host and so on. So I think that's the first step. And more than dynamic spectrum sharing, we would more ask to Europe to make the a clear overview on what is available in every country, because as I said, we're active in the Netherlands as well, in the UK, and it's always getting to the right person with the regulator and so on to know what is possible, and sometimes it takes a long time and it has an impact on the project and so on and so on. So there's some work to be done there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree. I think maybe we need like a private 5G spectrum observatory or something like that. Yeah. So, Sander, last couple of seconds before we run out.
Yeah, just to add, make sure we have a spectrum which is very similar in Europe across the board. So I don't like a patchwork solution. And I think that's in line with what Heidi mentioned and Mitch. And dynamic spectrum sharing is a nice technology, but we are mainly talking about greenfield deployment. So why not just go for the right thing, the real thing right away?
Great. Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank all of you very much. It's been a really good panel. I think we could probably have got on for another hour easily.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we'll have another opportunity to do that. But thank you once again. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.